Welcome to Module 4, the what and how of secondary transition assessments. This is Mary. Mary is a 16-year-old student who loves art and design, excels in hands-on and group school projects, participates on the JV soccer team, and likes to spend time with a small group of friends. She was classified with a learning disability in 5th grade, primarily in reading and auditory processing. She has completed her 10th grade year enrolled in the typical core academic classes, as well as electives within the art department. She enrolls each semester in a study skills class for additional support. She has enjoyed most of her classes when the instruction is highly differentiated and students are able to work on group projects. However, she often finds it hard to pay attention in class and is distracted by other students. Her reading difficulties are accommodated through access to intensive reading instruction, specialized learning strategies, digital technologies, and opportunities to obtain the notes and lectures from her teachers. In addition, she is given extra time for tests. Mary plans to attend college and is leaning toward an interest in art and design, but has no idea about possible careers. She has had minimal work experiences thus far and is hoping to pick up a part-time job after soccer season is over. She is not willing to share information with her friends and teachers about her learning needs, and sometimes feels embarrassed in class when she is called on to read or respond to a direct question. At her last IEP meeting, her special education teacher and guidance counselor discussed the importance of planning for her college applications and preparing for her future. Mary and her family are confused about what to do next. Remember from slide 2, the ultimate goal of secondary transition assessment for students with disabilities is to help students develop a cohesive view of who they are and their future roles. The success of secondary transition assessment depends mostly on the student perspective. After reading about Mary, you and Mary should both have an understanding of her spins. Mary's plans for continuing her post-secondary education and employment means she will need a solid sense of her strengths, preferences, and interests, as well as her support needs. All of this requires the right data and information for Mary to share. Looking at all of the students' behaviors can open up possibilities. For example, employees at Microsoft are encouraged to think outside of the box and engage in creative representation of ideas. Think of a student and how you might look at certain behaviors from different perspectives that might translate into strengths as related to education and training, employment, and independent living. Think about what Mary's strengths are based on what we have read about her. Observing things that motivate a student or situations where they feel most comfortable can provide a lot of information on a student's preferences. For example, do they perform at their best indoors or outdoors? Think about what Mary's story and her preferences may be. It is important to include all aspects of a student's life in identifying a student's interests, including leisure time. Think about what you heard regarding Mary, considering where her interests lie. What a student needs for support in school may not translate into a need or support for future environments. From the information we gathered about Mary, consider what her needs and supports are in relation to her preferences and interests. Where are the gaps? Because secondary transition assessment should provide the information necessary for making practical decisions at various points in time, ongoing assessment is recommended. Unlike some assessments that are administered every 1 to 3 years, secondary transition assessments should be administered on a frequent basis, at least once per year, because adolescents experience rapid and dramatic changes in development, skills, and interests. How are you ensuring the use of ongoing secondary transition assessments that are comprehensive and tailored to the student's spins as they age? Student-centered planning is recognized as an essential component of quality secondary transition programs. Facilitating the student's self-awareness and decision-making abilities is an important part of the assessment process, so it is crucial to help students and families understand how and where secondary transition assessment plays a critical and ongoing role in the student's life.
Let's discuss secondary transition assessments as a student-centered process. The selection of assessments depends on the student's vision of career, educational, and independent living aspirations. Although the student should drive the process and the decision-making, The perspectives from several stakeholders can be very useful. Relevant members of the IEP team should provide input into assessment. In Mary's case, she wants the following people from her IEP team to provide input, besides herself, to ensure that every voice is heard and is useful in the development of her post-secondary transition services. She would like to have her pre-ETS provider present, as well as her vocational rehabilitation counselor, her school counselor, her English teacher, her parents, her special ed teacher, and her CTE teacher. All of these members are people that Mary wants to be part of her IEP team. This quote drives home the importance of the role that the student plays in post-secondary transition assessments. Involving students in the post-secondary transition assessment process will bring meaning to the student as they discover more about themselves. Consider the roles of the student. Involve the student by teaching them the importance of assessments and their role in the process, which includes helping to plan for the specific domains in which they want to know more about themselves, participating in their assessment process by identifying the specific methods and measures they would like to complete, using the information gathered to develop their secondary goals and secondary transition plans, keeping a portfolio of learning strategies, accommodations, experiences, and information about their spins, and focusing on student-directed planning that should be the underlying framework when implementing secondary transition reference assessments. Some data could be anecdotal or observational information. Some data will come from formal or semi-formal assessments, but the important thing is that we are looking at the student in a well-rounded way. It may seem overwhelming to consider individualized post-secondary transition assessments for every student. This 5-question strategy will help to think about planning assessments of individual students. What do we already know about the student? If you already have information in a particular area, then you can fill in this information and you don't need to continue to assess in that area. For example, Mary's team knew that her best methods of communication. What do we need to learn? This is where you focus your efforts during the upcoming year. For Mary, the team knew very little about her career interests, her abilities related to self-determination, and specific assistive technology she may need. How will we gather the information? Here is where you can turn to the range of formal and informal assessments and approaches available to collect information and brainstorm which assessments might be the best for each student. Who will gather the information? This needs to be a collaborative effort. The student, family, and other educational and adult agency professionals should assist in a collaborative assessment process. In Mary's case, the team may have the assistive technology, or AT, specialist complete an assessment of Mary's AT needs for post-secondary settings, or have Mary and her family visit colleges to identify the types of accommodations and supports offered on certain campuses. When will information be gathered? Having a timeline for compiling the information is critical. If you don't set a deadline well in advance of the secondary transition planning meeting, you will not have the information you need to develop the services and experiences related to the student's preferences, interests, and strengths. Mary has 2 more years in high school, and her team will have to carefully plan for the best ways to collect relevant assessment data for her. Let's look at some examples. A student named James has a planning form for secondary transition assessments. Areas of consideration are listed for each assessment domain, followed by the 5 questions. So the domains include, in this example, current and future employment. And then we move on to areas to consider for James, his occupational interests and values and his work aptitude. And then we go through the 5 questions. What do we know? And we list in this column the things that we already know about James. And then what do we need to learn? What do we need to learn about James that will help us develop his plan? And how will we gather this info? This is the column where you put exactly how you're going to gather the information that you need to gain. And who will gather the info? Again, in this column, this is where you list the people that are going to gather the specific information for each section. And when will the information be gathered? This is the timeline that you establish for gathering the data that you need. For current and future employment, James will also need to be assessed in these areas using the same form with the same questions: assistive technology, temperament and personality, and manual dexterity. Another student named Heather has the same secondary transition assessment planning form that is filled in with the areas to consider based on what her team knows about her. So just like with James, we have the assessment domains followed by areas to consider, what we already know about Heather, what we need to learn, how will we gather the information, who will gather the information, and when will the information be gathered. And some of these aren't filled in this example, but this potentially could be filled in by the IEP team. Independent living just isn't the black and white where the student will live as an adult. When looking at independent living assessments for students, here are some areas to consider as well: self-awareness, self-determination and self-advocacy, money management, home living, recreation and leisure interests, community navigation, how the person gets around in the community, personal safety, medical and health matters, communication skills, interpersonal relationships, and community participation are all things to consider in the area of independent living.